Hello and welcome to episode number 7 of the Unreal Engine beginner tutorial series. In this video we're going to work on materials again, but this time we're going to try to create a more realistic material because we're going to work with textures. So if you remember a few episodes back, I created a new project with the starter content. So if we go into starter content over from in the content browser and go into textures, we'll see that we have a nice collection of textures. So we will work on this texture. We will work with let's work with the rock. No, not the rock, because it has with the metal sheet. So we'll try to create a metallic material out of this metal sheet. Okay, so something pretty simple. And we also have a texture right over here, which is also a metal sheet, and it's actually based on this other texture. The difference is this texture is going to give the information to the material of the color, okay? But this texture is actually going to give the normal information, okay? So this is not the normal texture, this is a normal map texture. And it pretty much represents how light is going to affect this texture. So it's going to create the bumps and it's going to make it look really nice. So what we're going to do now is go into the content, and we want let's go back to third person BP. Well, actually let's go back to content and let's create a new folder, and let's call this one materials. So in this folder we will store the materials that we'll make. So let's create a material and let's just call this texture texture metal. So if you remember, you want to start the name of your material with this M over here, so you know it's a material. So if you remember, we have a base color, and this will store the information for the color, but this time instead of a solid color we want a texture. So let's look up for texture sample, and the texture we want, I think it's called steel. Yep. So let's duplicate this texture, so Control C, Control B. And for the one below, we want the one with the normal map. Okay, so this texture has a red, a green, and a blue value, and it also has an alpha, which is this one over here. The alpha pretty much it's kind of like the opacity. Okay, we'll work on that later in this tutorial. We also want something else, which is the texture coordinate, and the reason why we want this will pretty much tell this texture how it has to appear in the material. Okay, let's just plug it in without changing anything and let's see how it looks. So let's wait for this to apply. Okay, so you see it doesn't look that bad, but if we plug in with the texture coordinate, it should look much nicer. Well, it looks kind of similar, but it depends on the texture, okay? But you always want to make sure you have a texture coordinate. So before we keep working on with the normals and all that stuff, what we want is to set up these values for metallic. So if you remember in the materials video, you create these values by pressing 1 in your keyboard and with a mouse, and just clicking with the mouse. So since it's metal, we obviously want a value of 1, okay? So let's plug this into the metallic. So let's say for the roughness we want a 0.5 value. Well, let's first see how it looks with the value of 1. So let's apply. And as you can see, it looks already much nicer. It actually looks like almost like real metal. So what we want to add now is the 0.5 to the roughness. It will make it sort of reflective but not too much. And as you can see, it's looking pretty nice. So now with this texture sample, before we keep going, we want to plug this into the UVs. And well, first of all, the UVs, I did not explain this before, you don't really need to, well, it's sort of like, so in an asset, the asset that you're going to use your texture on has a set of UV coordinates, and it's pretty much how the faces are placed, not in the mesh itself, but how the faces are placed so that they interact with the texture. It's a bit complicated. If you do not understand how to model, you don't need to understand this, okay? So it's not that big of a deal. Just make sure it's plugged into the UVs. And what we want now, so before we keep going, we have another pin I did not talk about before, which is the normal. And pretty much the normal is going to add like sort of like a bump to the texture, to the material, sorry. So let's plug this in and let's apply. And as you can see, it looks like it has some small dents in the texture and the material, so it looks quite nice. So to make this material more interesting, we can add something which is called a lerp, and pretty much what we're going to do with that lerp is change how the roughness works depending on the texture. So if we open up the texture, what we're going to do, so in the like flatter areas, we're going to make it shinier, and in the indents, I guess you can call them, we're going to make it less rough. So to do that, we're going to, well, actually we won't need to delete this value. So to destroy the connection between two nodes, you can just press Alt on one of the pins. So what we want to do is add another value, so let's do this, maybe let's change it to 0.65, I guess, and this one to 0.45. This will be a very subtle change, so you might not see it in the video, but you should be able to appreciate it in your computer. So what we want to do is add a lerp, and actually we want that, we do not want that lerp. We want the linear interpolate. There we go. So what we're going to do is grab this alpha and plug it into the lerp. Okay, so let's move these nodes. Oops, there we go. Nice, so you can have them nice and tidy. By the way, if you press twice in one of the wires, you create one of those dots. That's pretty cool. So pretty much what we're going to tell the program with the lerp is from the texture, from the alpha, the whiter values, the most white values are going to, so the values closer to 1 will have a roughness close to 0.65, and the ones that are close to 0 will have one of 0.45. So let's plug this into the roughness and let's apply. So that as you can see, it looks pretty cool. So let's try adding the material to this box over here. So let's build. Let's wait for that to build. It might take a while, so just don't worry about it. So now it built, and as you can see, it looks pretty cool. So let's go press play and let's get close to it. So as you can see, it's a pretty nice material. We will work on different kinds of materials, not only these, like we'll make even better materials in the future. This is just kind of like an introduction to how to work with textures in a material, and also about linear interpolates. So that's all for this video. If you have any questions, make sure to comment them down below. So thanks for watching, and to the next one. Bye.